Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of TechstrongTV. Today's episode is chock full of goodness. Got some great interviews, some good something old stuff from a previous virtual event, and more. Let me get right down to it. First of all, as I've mentioned, welcome to today's show. I hope everyone's well, and we've been back on the road here at TechstrongTV. We were out at RSA last week, and if you didn't catch any of our streaming interviews live, we will be replaying a lot of the interviews over the coming weeks. And actually, next week we are in Austin at the Linux Foundation Open Source Summit, and we'll be streaming live from there as well. And during the downtimes in between live interviews there, we'll be replaying our RSA interviews as well. So if you tune in next week, you can catch both our RSA stream and the live stream from the Linux Foundation's Open Source Summit. But let's focus in on today. Today's show includes an interview with an old friend of mine, Gabe Monroy. I knew Gabe when he was doing an open source startup and another startup before that. Wound up eventually selling Deus to Mike, which was one of his open source startups, sold it to Microsoft, and he really became a key person in the Microsoft Azure management team there. Gabe recently left Microsoft, though, to become Chief Product Officer over in DigitalOcean. And he talks to us about, why he did it, why he's really excited about what they're doing over at DigitalOcean, and some exciting things he's developing there based upon what he's learned. It's great. It was great to see Gabe. It's great to see the growth he's gone through here, and I highly recommend it. Next up, I have another interview that I did with Brian Gilmore. Brian's been on before, of course. He's our Director of Product Management at Influx Data, the people behind Influx Tv. And they just released their Edge Data Replication, a new capability for centralized business insights. And Brian thinks this could be a real game changer there. He'll tell us why. Check that one out. After that, really happy to have our monthly featuring GitLab. It's the lab, featuring developer, evangelist, CNCF, I think board member, Brendan O'Leary, where he's going to tell us about what's new in this month's release at GitLab. After that, we have a good interview with Charlene. Charlene is interviewing Michael Hunger, Senior Director of User Innovation at Neo4j. And he's going to talk about tool sprawl, and I don't know if there is such a thing as avoiding it, but it's a good interview with Char. Char also has a second interview with Jim Barkdahl, CEO of Axiomatics, about having a solid cybersecurity strategy and NIST compliance around NIST guidelines. So two good interviews there from Charlene. She'll also have the news and webinar previews. And then we have a View with Vizard video today. Kaseya CISO Jason Minar explains why organizations may want to recruit cybersecurity talent from government agencies. That's not a bad strategy, actually. So stay tuned. It's a chock full of show. We'll be back in a moment.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another TechstrongTV segment. I'm really happy to be joined in this segment by a gentleman I think I first met Gabe. Well, it was around when I was starting DevOps.com, so it had to be 8 years ago, 9 years ago, 8. Gabe Monroy. Gabe, welcome. Hey, man, it's been a long time coming, but welcome to TechstrongTV.
Thanks, Al. It's great to be here.
So, Gabe, why don't we start there? Let's go back 7, 8 years. You're a little younger. I was a little younger too. You were based out near Boulder, right, doing your thing. You know, if you don't mind, bring our audience from there to now.
Sure. Yeah. Still based in Boulder, by the way. Live in a different spot up here. I'm actually in a farmhouse now in Boulder, but I used to live in the city there. And yeah, I was, I'd started a company, called OpDemand. It was, building tools for, DevOps teams that were, looking to streamline application development for folks. And I think that's where you and I had crossed paths on DevOps.com. I ended up selling that company to Engine Yard, with the storied Ruby on Rails PaaS company, and I came in there as the CTO over at Engine Yard, which was an interesting 200-person company doing interesting stuff in the PaaS space, Ruby on Rails space. From there, we kind of spun out a group called that was focused on building like a real Heroku compete that was called Deis, and that was another company that I had started. And what was interesting about Deis was it was one of the first ISVs to really use Docker seriously. And that got me in pretty close contact with Solomon Hykes and the team at Docker. I myself was the largest external contributor to the Docker project. I built the volume subsystem in Docker, and so we got to work in open source with a lot of the folks there. And Deis became very popular as a Heroku alternative to folks who want to run on what ended up being Kubernetes. So I got very plugged into the Kubernetes community. Brendan Burns, Joe Bader, Craig McLucky, early days. Ended up selling Deis over to Microsoft. And so I came into Microsoft about April of 2017 at that time. And I bootstrapped the container team over there and started AKS, Azure's Kubernetes service, which wound up being the fastest service in the history of Azure, which was a pretty cool thing. I like to say, it's not that me and Brendan Burns did anything special. It's sort of we put the bucket out and it started to rain. It started to rain a lot. Demand from Kubernetes extremely high. So that was a really fun time. And over time there, through the rest of my career, ended up taking responsibility for the serverless portfolio, for Service Fabric, which runs a lot of Azure's internal, or really all of Azure's internal infrastructure, API management, logic apps, app service, which is sort of the web paths there. So got a lot of experience doing kind of the big company scale thing, but all, again, the theme, focused on developers, operations teams, platform teams, and kind of the DevOps space. Today, though, I work for DigitalOcean, made a transition here. I'm the Chief Product Officer. So I'm now responsible for all of the product-facing engineering teams, product management, design, TPM, and basically everything we do to deliver products to end users. And what's very different about DigitalOcean than at Microsoft is Microsoft all focused on enterprise, right? And, enterprise, everything, right? And that's pretty true for a lot of software companies. At DigitalOcean, we're really focused on small businesses. And with 16 million new developers scheduled to enter the market by, I think it's 2025, according to IDC, a lot of opportunity for us to help empower developers, not just in the US or Western Europe, but frankly, across the globe. So super excited about that.
Absolutely. You know what I always found interesting about Microsoft, Gabe, is they've always been focused on the enterprise. I don't know if a lot of people realize that, but their channels team, their sales team, if you will, enterprise focus. I mean, kind of classic enterprise focused, way back, right? Based on IBM kind of overlays that they were with DOS and Windows back then. But yet, that SMB market kind of comes to them really without them, not being their primary focus. If you look at Azure, there are, companies big and small that use Azure for various things. Hosted Exchange, Microsoft Office hosted, all of that stuff. So interesting. But let's focus on DigitalOcean a bit. I love the CPO title. Our newest brand, our newest website that we launched a few months ago now is called Digital CXO, Gabe, and that's really you, right? It's not a traditional CTO, it's not a traditional CIO, but it's these chief product officers who oftentimes, by the way, also double down as CTO or CIO or running engineering teams. So not only are they kind of setting the vision of the product, but they're leading the team that's developing the product, right? Coding it as well. And, this is this new digital CXO. That's who that's what we see popping up in companies large and small. It's kind of where sometimes it's a little bit of a fusion between two different roles or more. Sometimes it's a very unique role, but it's definitely the up and coming thing.
Yeah, and you definitely described my role, right? It's what you classically consider a CTO role. It's just rather than the focus being on technology specifically, as the CTO title would suggest, it's focus on the P of products and digital products that we are trying to build, for our customers. It just so happens that we're actually helping our customers build digital products of themselves, on their own. So interesting interplay there. But really this idea that the products that we build use technology, right? It's not about the technology that we're building. I mean, we do lots of interesting things in terms of how we manage efficiency in data centers, how we're doing isolation of serverless functions, and we just announced a serverless offering. Lots of cool stuff that we're doing, that a CTO would be mindful of. But that's not what I care about day in, day out, right? What I care about day in, day out is how are we enabling our customers to build digital products of the future, AI-enabled, auto-scaling, elastic, in nature. That's what I need to do. And then the technology that we need kind of pulls along through that. And I have lots of folks who are experts in that area to help me out on that journey.
Absolutely. The very definition. So let's hear, Dave. What's new with DigitalOcean, man? I know you guys recently had some announcements on offerings and stuff.
Yeah, we just announced our DigitalOcean Functions offering, which I'm super excited about. Really oriented around helping developers who want to write Jamstack applications or other API-oriented applications use serverless functions as a programming model to make that super simple, right? And so with serverless functions, you don't have to write Docker containers. You don't have to think about container technology, Kubernetes, any of that stuff. You literally just write a piece of code and you go from code to cloud directly. Equivalent in disposition to something like AWS Lambda or Azure Functions. I myself was responsible for Azure Functions over at Azure, so pretty familiar with the space. And I'm really excited about how at DigitalOcean we've been able to meet developers where they are with our functions offering. I think all too often what I saw in the space, having been ingrained in serverless tech for a while, is it's often positioned as sort of a successor to containers or virtual machines or whatever. It's like, VMs, containers, serverless. So that's kind of the best thing, right? And so let's do serverless. That's the future. In practice, that's not at all how it works. Now, that's not what my customers tell me at all. Really, what happens is serverless, functions and serverless application models, they complement container-based applications. They complement virtual machine-based applications. And what's really important is making sure that you have a serverless offering that allows you to kind of stitch together all of those things into something that is going to deliver value for our end customers. So DigitalOcean Functions, we have something called App Platform on DO, where you can register your functions in App Platform, which allows them to easily reference a database or containers that are running on our App Platform products, and really use functions to stitch them together into a broader application definition. That's really where we're seeing a lot of value today.
Yep, I would imagine it is. Because, look, you know what, Gabe, I remember with Dast and the Docker stuff you were working on back then, you were kind of, we've had this, I don't know if it's the second, third, fourth revolution in open source with the advent of cloud native, which to me kind of encompasses all these things that we're talking about. And I mean, you were right there at the beginning of it and have ridden it through now here and continue to do so. It's kind of a golden age. But the interesting thing is what it's resulted in is a whole new stack. That we have a new compute stack that we use, right? And even Microsoft at Azure, right, is using this new stack of Kubernetes and containers. It's the cloud native stack, right, which replaced whether you were a LAMP person or a Windows stack person, whatever. It's really been replaced by this, cloud native stack, if we can call it. And, so now you got a company like DigitalOcean that's offering the spectrum of this cloud native stack. And the problem, as I see it, I mean, from where I sit, I sit in a different chair than you do, right? Is that a lot of these SMB non-enterprise, smaller businesses, it's still really hard for them. Wrapping their heads around, their arms around Kubernetes and service mesh and, observability and a lot of the other kind of cloud native pieces that are coming together here to form this new stack. They need a DigitalOcean to kind of stitch it together. And I don't know if stitching's the right word, but they need a DigitalOcean to stitch it together for them and say, okay, here's your stack, here's your offering, all the functionality you need to build great new applications, to satisfy your customers, to build your business is right here. It's in this stack for you, and we've made it easy, or we've made it easier. Is that, I mean, how do you view that as? Is that your charge here, or?
Absolutely, Alan. And I think the word I'd use is prescriptive guidance, right? Mm-hmm. It's funny, you look at the momentum that you see in the CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, the related set of technologies there, Kubernetes, Prometheus, Envoy, things like that. It is shocking how much momentum there is behind that area. You go look at KubeCon. I got a chance to give a keynote at the KubeCon in Barcelona where I talked about service mesh interfaces back, in the olden times. Pre-COVID. And just seeing the energy in the crowd and the momentum there.
It's nuts.
It's nuts, right?
I was just in Valencia last month at this year's KubeCon. About the same amount of people as Barcelona, believe it or not, about 8,000 people, and still very, very enthusiastic.
Still very enthusiastic, and good reason to be, right? You haven't seen this kind of momentum behind a set of open source technologies. Certainly, I can't remember a time. Linux is probably the closest thing to that. That's really saying something. However, there's a big counter reaction going on to the set of complexity and the amount of building blocks that people are being forced to wrestle with. So at DigitalOcean, we're laser focused on providing more prescriptive guidance, better product flows, for folks to, sort of.
It's got to get easier, Gabe. It's still a little too hard and a little too overwhelming for a majority of the audience, of the market. Not to say they're not trying their best, but I see it. I mean, I look at it, I'm like, wow, that's gonna.
So Alan, there's an interesting thing I learned while I was at Azure. I mentioned we were able to get AKS and the fastest growing service in the history of Azure. The pattern that we found there was interesting to this point. There was demand for Kubernetes from platform teams, operations teams inside of enterprises. So an enterprise infrastructure and operations team or a central IT department in an enterprise, there was a group, and you see this pattern in companies of varying sizes, there's a group that's chartered in an organization with empowering developers in the company. And they have a lot of power, right, in terms of the way things get done. And it's really that group who's wanted to build their own paths, their own sort of development workflow for organizations in their company with requirements like portability. It needs to work on our on-prem environment. It needs to work in our cloud environment. It needs to work maybe on multiple cloud environments, right? And there's a set of skills, DevOps, pipeline enablement, secure software supply chain. There's the things that group is concerned about. But really, when you look at the growth of Kubernetes, It's from people in that role, people who were not but a few years ago slinging Puppet and Chef. The growth there is really not from what I would term developers, right? People who are building digital products using Kubernetes directly. You might see a little bit of that from some advanced folks, but a lot of those folks look at Kubernetes and go, wow, why would I want to use this, right? And so they're seeing traction today on things like AWS or, on Jamstack, services or on DigitalOcean's app platform. They don't want to have to, like maybe they're building Docker containers on their laptop because it makes local packaging and local development easier, but they don't want to learn about container orchestration and they don't want to learn about Kubernetes YAML. So a big counter reaction from that. But I personally, when I see KubeCon and 10,000 people in the audience there, they're not typically people who are writing the next gen digital product for their company. They're people who are behind the scenes building platforms to enable other people in their company to do that sort of thing. And so in a weird way, Kubernetes and the cloud native community has been exactly what that group needed, but there's another set of folks who are not being served right now by that ecosystem, and we just got to make it a lot simpler for folks. So that's really what I make up.
I mean, to me, Gabe, it's classic early adopters versus mainstream.
Yep.
Right? Those early adopters are willing to, buckle on their toolkits, their tool belts, and tinker. The mainstream wants to set it and forget it to a certain degree. They just want it to work.
Yeah.
But anyway, man, hey, we're overtime. I knew this was going to happen. Hey, congratulations on moving over to DigitalOcean. Now that you're there, you got to be a regular on here. So we'll be looking at you for steady updates and keeping us posted.
Happy to come back anytime, Alan. It's great.
All right. Gabe Monroy, DigitalOcean Chief Product Officer here on TechstrongTV. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, we're back here on TechstrongTV. My guest is Brian Gilmore. Brian is with our friends at Influx and Influx Tv, people behind Influx Tv. Hey Brian, how are you?
Great, Alan. Glad to be back. Thanks for having us again.
A pleasure to have you on, my friend. So, Brian, there's some big news announced yesterday from Influx, but before we get to it, I guess we need to, I think most people know Influx and Influx TV, but for those who may not, why don't we give them a quick kind of foundation before we jump to the news?
Absolutely, yeah. So Influx Data is the company. We're the sort of folks behind Influx TV on the commercial and corporate side. We work closely with our community to build a product called Influx Tv, which to this point has been available as a sort of open source installable as a enterprise database, which is not open source, but has all, of course, those capabilities that an IT team would want to run it in their data centers. And then we've had, for the last 2 or so years, we've had a cloud SaaS hosted version of that database that we make available to anybody from free to pay as you go to annual contracts with the larger organizations. So Influx TV is a time series database. It captures any type of metric that has a timestamp, and it's used heavily in IT operations, but then we're seeing tremendous amount of emerging use cases around industrial IoT and in the traditional or the more greenfield IoT.
Excellent. So, and if anybody wants more information, you can go to Influx DB for the open source database itself and Influx Data.
Yeah, I mean, influxdata.com, our website, but also check out the repository on GitHub. It's pretty easy to find. I think we got like 24,000 stars or something. So
yeah, just a couple.
Yeah.
All right. So Brian, and you know what else we should mention? What's your role at Influx?
Yeah, so I'm the director, or sort of, I work with the team on strategy around IoT and other emerging technologies. So these are sort of the intersection between time series data and mechanical equipment, consumer products, and then artificial intelligence, machine learning, augmented reality, crypto, blockchain, and DLT. So all the brand new and exciting stuff. I'm really fortunate to be able to work with that.
Very cool. All right. We've got that all out of the way now, Brian. Let's talk about the news you guys announced yesterday.
Sure. Yeah, we're excited to sort of tell everybody about this new edge data replication capability. It's really the evolution of what we've been sort of pointing towards and working towards over the last, I would say, 2 years. We took a lot of time to really shore up our cloud capabilities. And we have lots of customers who are just sending data directly to the cloud from the edge using Telegraph or using our client libraries or even just the APIs. But what we were always thinking about and working on were that sort of large group of folks who also needed to do some time series database, workload at the edge, as close to where that data was being generated as possible, especially in those IoT and industrial IoT use cases. So, we launched probably about a year ago, just an ability to sort of like write a Flux task. Flux is our time series processing language that could push data in batch scheduled format to other Influx DB instances. But what we're doing here is different in that we are creating a real-time component in a queue. It's a durable disk-backed queue. And each Influx DB OSS instance is sort of configurable to the limits of a customer's imagination in terms of what data they want to collect locally, how precise they want to keep that data, whether it's like, to the nanosecond or to the second, how they want to format it, enrich it, or whatever. And then pre or post processing, we allow them to configure that data stream to be sent to Influx DB Cloud and stored there. So you can have very high precision, very precise, time series input to say your automation and control, or your autonomy running at the edge. But then you can still be backfilling your more summarized information that's used for, those business uses, or even, the sort of cloud powered technologies like AR or, artificial intelligence.
Excellent. One of the things we're seeing, Brian, is this move to the edge. And we've seen it for the last couple of years, but I don't know if people really understood the relationship, let's call it, between the edge and you want to call it core.
Yeah,
right.
Cloud. Yeah.
The cloud, and how smart companies will play or leverage that relationship to deliver more power to the end users.
For sure. I think that, a lot of vendors were really enticed by the benefits or the value of the cloud. I think especially on the software development and delivery side, right? It's great developing new technologies in the cloud. There's all kinds of tools. You can have remote workforces. There's horsepower there of like both size and strength that is really impractical or implausible to either run in your data center or say like on a microcomputer running in an electrical cabinet in your manufacturing plant. So what this solution does is it powers that precision at the edge. You can put Influx DB OSS on anything from a Raspberry Pi to an industrialized ruggedized computer to just, a desktop somewhere. And then you can sort of, through the local area network, collect and process data. And do everything you need to do with it right there at the edge. And then that is, of course, now connected with that power of the cloud. So having a best of both worlds, nobody is going to work or live in a compute-free environment. There will always be, horsepower, compute, storage, memory, all of those things as close to the point of data creation as possible. It's called gravity. It's a real thing. And I think a lot of vendors maybe now are starting to realize that the split between horsepower in terms of whether it's running at the edge or whether it's running at the cloud is going to be more fluid than, I think the sort of CSP storyline would have told you 2 or 3 years ago.
Absolutely. And I think we're just scratching the surface.
For sure. Right.
I think with the whole work from anywhere kind of movement, which is proving sort of has more staying power than maybe some executives thought it was going to have.
Yeah, for sure.
The edge and increased capabilities on the edge. And then also, look, the cloud and the whole cloud native movement and open source, making it more powerful and easier than ever to spin up there. I think the dynamics at play here what are they going to result in? They're going to result in more opportunities to make better applications, right? More useful, more powerful, probably more economical to power the next gen of stuff.
It's exactly right. I mean, it's going to enable innovation like we've never seen before as well, right? You have like these two sort of conflicting movements right now. The one that's all about decentralization and deployment, right? This is sort of the Web 3 and, the blockchain DLT type, not cryptocurrency, but the crypto sort of related distributed apps. Mm-hmm. And IoT and industrial IoT, right? Like you can't build your factory in the cloud. That we're talking about physical devices and assets that are operating in the real world, and then the applications that power them. And you can't take an application that powers like a mining machine and put that in the cloud either, because once that mining machine goes into the ground, it's going to be lost to network and it's going to be lost to the cloud. We have customers like Karanak who are doing like mining machines with that. And, the database goes into the ground with the machine. And then when it comes back out and that, the connectivity is now available to the cloud, that's where that durable queue says, okay, cool, I'm connected. And then it can ship up that data. So, it can happen in both an offline and online. But the important thing is that now we're like really looking at the cloud, the data center, and the edge is like a single ecosystem. Right. So it's not either or either or anymore. It's, it's all one database.
Absolutely, man. Brian, where can people get more information?
Sure. Check out the press release. We just launched a press release Wednesday morning. I think there's a link to that right on our website. We've got a landing page for the product, and you can check it out in the docs. It's called Edge Data Replication. We're calling it EDR for short. I think it's like our first acronym. We're very excited about that. And, we love the feedback. And as everything else, it's open source. So we'd love contributions and ideas, and tell us what you think and what we should fix and how we can improve it. Appreciate it.
Perfect, man. Hey, I love it. Brian, congratulations, not just to you, but to the whole Influx team. This is a big one.
Thank you.
Where it takes it.
I wish I could take more credit, but of course, product management, marketing, sales, everybody's coming together on this one. So it's very exciting.
You know what? It takes a village, as someone once wrote. Anyway, man, hey, good seeing you. Stay in touch and keep us posted.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks again, and look forward to the next one.
All right. Brian Gilmore from Influx Technologies, Influx Tv here on TechstrongTV. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Initech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Initech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Initech conferences are produced by TechStrong Live and powered by TechStrong Group.
Hello, friends, and welcome to The Lab, a monthly show where we look at the latest and greatest developments in software development, DevOps, and the cloud. I'm your host, Brendan O'Leary, coming to you today from warming up, getting towards summer, Annapolis, Maryland, on the east coast of the United States. And for those who don't know me, I'm a developer evangelist with GitLab, which means I get to talk to amazing folks throughout the software and engineering space about what it means to really get code shipped into production. Today is a very special episode. We're very excited about it. GitLab 15's first release, version 15.0, is out and brings a new cutting-edge DevOps capabilities, a set of capabilities to GitLab's One DevOps platform. And so we have a lot of exciting new product updates in this release and coming throughout GitLab 15 that are going to help developers and everyone involved in the DevOps lifecycle collaborate and deliver software quickly and securely. And this release enhances the platform's capabilities in solution areas including visibility, observability, continuous security and compliance, enterprise agile planning, workflow automation, and support for data science workloads. And today I've got two special guests with me from GitLab's product team to chat through the latest updates and what's coming for all of GitLab 15. First is Hillary Benson, GitLab's Director of Product Management, and Kenny Johnson, Senior Director of Product Management. They'll join us in just a little bit and talk about some of the latest GitLab features and what they're going to mean for GitLab's users. So first, let's dive into some of those key updates, right? We talked about this increase in visibility and observability to help break down the silos between different teams that are involved in the DevOps process and drive efficiency for delivering better software faster. So teams can work faster when they have a shared visibility into the behavior of the application and what's changing and what's changed in production and how their workflow is evolving. GitLab 15 provides new capabilities that extend visibility and give organizations a real end-to-end view of the value delivery and the health of their applications. So some upcoming key features here are product analytics and experimentation, which will allow organizations to test and validate new ideas with their actual data, measure adoption of DevOps across their teams and projects. There's also a lot of new observability functions coming. The idea of being able to do unified error tracking, metrics, logs, and traces using an on-by-default, open source, end-to-end tested and secure observability solution within the One DevOps platform. And there's also going to be increased visibility. We're expanding support for all of the DevOps and research assessment metrics. That's the DORA 4 you hear me talk about a lot, including improvements to our value stream analytics platform for both projects and groups. And so first, Kenny, I'd love to go to you and have you share with us, how did some of these features come to be and what these updates will mean for GitLab users?
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. I'm thrilled to be here. Let's take them one by one. Visibility and observability. They're distinct, but they're all about making sure that you have insights into your DevOps process and your applications. For visibility, we've been including reports that show you the DORA 4 metrics in GitLab for some time, for the better part of the entire 14 release. What we're really excited about adding in feature in the 15 release is the ability to diagnose pain points and best practices and share those across teams. The DORA 4 metrics in the book Accelerate are a really great map to show you how important software delivery metrics like DORA 4 map to business value. But what they don't really give you is a set of best practices for how to institutionalize that across an organization that has lots of different teams working on all sorts of different software with different deployment methods, and how to make sure that you're utilizing best practices from one team to another. So in working with a number of our Lighthouse customers who've been utilizing the DORA 4 metrics, we've started to develop a really strong methodology that will allow for organizations to not just gauge the health of DevOps across an organization, but at an individual team level, and make sure that the best practices and kind of continuous learning from DevOps about that helps lead to those outcomes are shared across other teams. On an observability front, last year, at the end of last year, we acquired a company called OpsTrace that was a single observability distribution that include metrics, logs, and tracing. We're going to be adding error tracking to that and building it directly integrated into the GitLab experience so that developers no longer have to jump across 4 different observability tools when trying to understand the state of a system during an outage, for example. We can also create really amazing experiences that no other platform can do as the one DevOps platform by bringing observability into developers' core workflow. You think about things like defining observability as code at the time when you write your application, showcasing to developers where recent errors are occurring within the application while they're making decisions about how to structure and write the software they're writing, or even bringing in the right context at the time of an incident by including the developer who made the last commit to the relevant piece of code, or recent deployment information and deployment pipelines. All of those things really help not only institutionalize observability so that if something breaks, you can quickly understand it and fix it, but also improve the context switching that's typically required today to fix an outage when your application is down.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think you're right. Those two things kind of go hand in hand, right? This ability to understand the importance of the DORA metrics and then report on them are great, but then to really be able to act on those stability metrics, that mean time to recovery, actually making improvements in those metrics is really critical. And obviously, observability is a big part of that. And it's something we heard a lot about. You and I were together at KubeCon EU. A lot of discussion around observability, and I think you hit the nail on the head to say, look, today that might be a bunch of different systems that I have to kind of context switch across. And so that one DevOps platform kind of enables you to kind of cut through all of that and put it all in one place. And I'm really excited to see where that's going. And then kind of on a similar note, but maybe on the other side, right? There's, Agile and planning and workflow automation that, is kind of at the front of the DevOps lifecycle, right? That's, again, something that has typically meant maybe context switching, number of different systems. Can you talk about what we're seeing and doing kind of in that enterprise Agile planning, workflow automation world, and integrating that into one DevOps platform? Yeah,
that's exactly right. It is kind of you can think of it as the other side or the next step. You want to make sure that what you're planning is relevant to based on how you're improving your process and how your application is performing. I think it boils down to this kind of simple statement. Today, many enterprise software leaders, VPs of development or directors of development would say, I use one tool for planning and organizing my work and a separate tool where work happens. And that context switching is extremely painful. And you would ask yourselves as a leader, why are you leading from the tool that's not where the work is happening? Isn't it important for you as a leader to not just have visibility into how the work is going, but have insights into how that work happens? You model the same practices for how work happens with how you plan. This is one of actually the big failures of Agile and DevOps within organizations, is because software development and the application creation process happens in an Agile way, but the planning process doesn't. And by having these two unified together, it really leads to a kind of more robust DevOps adoption within an organization. So we'll be working on improving well, I guess I'll say this. I don't think there's any tool today in the Agile planning world that connects how work is done and the kind of how work is planned. GitLab is the one DevOps platform. We do that really well. We think the reason why people use separate tools is because the tools are meant for different purposes today, and there's no DevOps tool that is also where the work is done that's giving you the insights and the experience that a leader of an organization who's trying to plot that to set objectives and track plans actually gets what they want. So we'll be investing in executive dashboards that showcase from objective to code exactly how work is happening, and improving the ability to get insight into that by showcasing, by utilizing things like the DORA metrics to say, we know these typically take 3 days in review. So our projected plan for when we think this set of activity is going to be completed is updated based on the fact that it's now in review. Think about the kinds of experiences that you can have as a leader to really drill down into where work's happening, as well as get that bubbled up view when the place where you're tracking work is also the place where work happens.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's really exciting, not only, again, like for leaders, but also for developers, right? I think in my past, as both a product manager and engineering leader in the past, it's when you really dig into how work's being done and what the work is, that informs the plan. And, a good plan is informed by, that. And then also the plan can impact, how are we going to get something done? What's the most critical thing to get done next? And how does that relate to the larger plan? And so I think it's not only great for leaders, I think it's great for anyone working at any level in software development, right? From, CIO, VP of software, all the way down to a developer. It's going to help them really, understand the work to be done and, where there might be issues and how the plan is coming together. And there's a couple things. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to make one comment. We have this myth in software delivery that you don't have to sacrifice speed for security. The same goes for you don't have to sacrifice speed for planning insights, right? They go hand in hand. Developers are spending a lot of time inefficiently updating multiple sources of truth, tracking their work in different places. You can actually improve developer productivity while still being more planful and having more insight from a leadership perspective. It's not a trade-off. It's actually a bonus that you get when you do it in one DevOps platform.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've got a list here of some of the things we're working on, in enterprise agile planning and workflow automation. I just want to run through those real quick because I think they, are things that are, tangible benefits that people will see, throughout GitLab 15 and all the releases to come. So that's work items, right? This is the ability to create, a planning architecture that actually makes sense for your workflow, right? Including like, are you using some sort of enterprise agile framework? Okay, well, now let's make the work items in GitLab reflect that framework so that you can kind of be using the same language. Again, same language in the tool that you're planning, same language in the tool that you're delivering the work in. And it also, enables you to support, issues and epics and requirements that we have, but bring in things like tasks and features and objectives, these terms that are used often in enterprise agile planning, say that 3 times fast, and really bring them, into GitLab so you understand what's going on. There's also a concept of save views and queries. So these are features that are going to allow you to have kind of a customized view of GitLab issues, right? These now work items to match the planning workflow that you're expecting. Right, you talked a little bit about customized dashboards with aggregated data so that organizational leaders can get a pulse check on what's really going on. And again, that data is not something that has to be updated by the developer in 2 places or has to even be updated by someone who's not the developer. Right, the natural progression of the work being done can update that automatically when you have one DevOps platform. Another thing we didn't talk about is, how machine learning can factor into this. And another acquisition we made last year was Unreview. And we're bringing in the idea of using that to streamline the code reviewer selection and planning overhead by allowing you to automate, who's the right team member to review this line of code based on all of everything that we know in the platform about the code and who's written it and who reviews these kinds of changes. Again, reducing that time to the next workflow step of, hey, we got to review this, but who's going to review it? And so really excited for that. And then we're also enhancing suggestions in code review to kind of try and reduce the overall cognitive load, time to get something from being coded first to being deployed by making suggestions that are in context, right? That understand the context of the change being made, the context of the production system, so that you can kind of accelerate decision-making. And then the other thing you talked about, Kenny, that I'd love to talk with Hillary about a little bit is this concept of not sacrificing speed for security or vice versa, right? This idea of bringing continuous security into your DevOps process, continuous compliance. Hillary, maybe you can run us through some of the security and compliance features that are coming either in 15.0 or in the rest of the 15 release cycles. Where do those new features come from and what can we users expect?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think with these security updates, as is usually the case with GitLab, we're addressing the everyday pain points of software security for software developers, right? It's most often the case that organizations will identify vulnerabilities really late in the development process. And that's a problem because resolving security findings that are discovered really late in the game are more painful and cost more to find and fix, both in terms of the time that teams have to spend identifying, triaging, and then examining and fixing the code, remembering what was going on with it and shipping something new, as well as in terms of the increased risk that those issues pose to the business with respect to security breaches or service disruptions. And I think that dynamic is really just compounded by the evolution of how we build modern applications and kind of the growing popularity of cloud native architecture, right? So cloud native approaches provide a lot of great advantages from a security standpoint, but one of the trade-offs is that building them can be more complex from a process standpoint. So that means it's only getting more important to have processes and tooling that enable you to discover security issues as early as possible. So with our GitLab 15 release, we're strengthening the ability to help enforce strong security and compliance practices across your entire software development lifecycle. And then we continue to strengthen our built-in security scanning and compliance auditing features so that we're enabling development teams to focus on innovating without peppering more tools into their processes to manage or getting in the way of just shipping product.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's a thing I think about all the time. My role right before GitLab, working for a government contractor, the U.S. federal government, and you would get to the end of an 8-week release cycle where actually we're doing enterprise agile planning, safe with a safe framework. You get to the end of an 8-week cycle and it'd be like, oh yeah, we've got to scan for security, right? And you'd get 175 new things and you'd have no context to, wait, is this a developer's going to say, well, it's probably a false positive. But like when you don't have that context to say, what is this change actually intended and how does it impact everything, right? That kind of cognitive load that a developer has when they're making the change, right? They load all this stuff, this mental model of the change into their brain. That's the time to think about security. And that can be hard if you're not doing it continuously. So that's really exciting. Can you maybe dig, Hillary, into some of the specific updates and security and compliance features that are coming? I know, again, going back to this KubeCon EU, I was recently at, supply chain security was a big focus. Compliance is obviously a big focus for a lot of customers. Maybe you could walk through some of those specific features that are coming.
Yeah, absolutely. There's quite a lot to talk about here. Actually, we have a lot going on in this area. I think the first thing that I'd want to highlight would be our focus on software supply chain security, right? So this is a major area of concern for pretty much anyone building software right now. And it's really become a focal point over the last year or so. It's an area that's very broad, it's complex to manage, and it presents a set of problems that GitLab is actually very well positioned to address. By virtue of being the one DevOps platform that facilitates your full software development process, right? So in addition to a lot of pre-existing capabilities in this area, GitLab 15 specifically is adding support for automatic generation of an exportable software bill of materials, or SBOM, along with signed attestation for build artifacts. So there's sort of near-term focus. And then we have a lot of planned functionality coming up around software supply chain security, and it's a major sort of area of strategic investment for GitLab. So stay tuned for a lot of great upcoming features around that. Another big thing we're focused on is security approval policies. So this is all about allowing security teams to apply a single set of centrally managed security policies, not just on individual projects, but also at the group level, right? And narrowly scoping who can edit those security policies. Being able to require two-step approval processes in case you want to change those approval rules. And all this is really about making security policies and processes scalable across your organization. We also have interesting stuff coming up in compliance management. So new capabilities here around providing compliance teams with visibility into history of changes that are made in a given project to bring that project into compliance at both the group and namespace levels. So this is really tracking your progress toward, building compliant environments by using dashboards in GitLab. We're also continuing a lot of work around advancing our security scanning technologies. So those who are familiar with GitLab's security offerings know that we really embrace a lot of open source security tooling, but we've also heavily invested in the development of proprietary scanning technology as well. So GitLab 15 expands on that in two main places, I would say. The first one is in our next generation SaaS scanning engine, and kind of evolving that from its current focus on false positive reduction to more robust and flexible rules with better controls to handle findings. So we're pretty excited about what's coming up there. And then the second place I'd say is with our proprietary DAS scanner, where we're working to enable faster scan speeds and more flexible configuration as compared to the open source alternatives that we ship with the product. Another big item in compliance is around streamlined audit events. So we're working to enable administrators to be able to stream audit events about projects, groups, settings, and so on to a destination of their choosing, right? So the data around audit logging can be like pretty prolific. And so the idea here basically is to allow users to aggregate GitLab data with other tools and then be able to build custom automation in response to whatever events of interest they might find. And then finally, we're also working on remote development environments. So the idea here is to provide a cloud-based development environment that enables your organization to enforce a zero trust policy and prevent source code from ever being stored locally. There's also a convenience factor here because it's also about enabling developers to just drop into a cloud-based dev environment and alter the code rather than having to drop onto their local system to do that development, which is great if you happen to be someone who devs on a lot of different projects and you have to have a bunch of different development environments. This remote development environment sort of enables you to do that more seamlessly. And that really sums up most of the major changes around security and compliance in 15.
Yeah. Oh, just that, huh?
Yeah,
just
that's it.
Okay, fine. I guess I'll take it. No, I mean, that remote development environment is really interesting to me. As like a self-professed amateur developer, part-time, play one on TV kind of developer. I think that's really, has a lot of implications, like you said, about security and zero trust, but also has a lot of implications about just making it easier for everyone to contribute to a project, right? And that might not be someone who develops on it every day, right? Like when you're a developer that's developing the same application every day, yeah, sure, maybe you have your development environment set up perfectly on your laptop the way you want it. But for someone who may not be in that kind of role or may just be, coming to build an open source, right? Contribute to GitLab, like having that remote development environment that can be set up for you is a huge deal. And, another set of team that kind of is tangentially related and part of that DevOps lifecycle, but maybe not developing software every day like the way we think of it, are data science teams and the data science workloads and machine learning that is quickly becoming a whole set of teams that are important in the DevOps lifecycle. And so, Kenny, lastly, I kind of want to ask you about that. I know we've talked a little bit about some of the machine learning and data science additions, but what kind of support are we giving to data science teams themselves as part of GitLab 15?
Yeah, and let's first state the vision of the One DevOps platform is to support the kind of team sport that is building, testing, securing, operating, iterating on software applications. And the reality is the future of modern software applications is that they will increasingly become a mix of software, infrastructure, and data, and models that go along with that data. And if you think about the world today, they're called data scientists, typically not necessarily data engineers. And the like world of DevOps and the automation around DevOps has not necessarily been applied to the model generation and deployment process. They typically use separate tools, separate collaboration spaces, and it can lead to slower times to deploy models, more frequent model breakages, lack of coordination between model deployment and application deployment. And so it's a great place for GitLab to invest in the future of what we know will be all software applications. So in the 14 release series, we've added support for improving the way that you can collaborate in merge requests around Jupyter Notebook changes, and added support for GPU runners to support model creation in GitLab CI/CD. We'll be continuing to improve that experience with a focus on bringing the data scientist experience into the DevOps loop. So enabling things like model registries or model performance measurement, and allowing for a better collaboration in the planning and creation process of model generation that doesn't happen in separate tools outside of the place where the rest of application development and infrastructure delivery is happening. So we're super excited about the investment. Actually, Hillary is the one leading that investment through the course of 15. But it's a place where we talked about KubeCon, similar to KubeCon, where GitLab has kind of been ahead of the game in terms of recognizing the importance of Kubernetes in infrastructure delivery. We're recognizing the importance of model development in future application delivery.
Yeah, that's great. And thanks so much I really could talk to the two of you all day probably about this, but we're getting to the end of our time together, and luckily that's the last thing I wanted to cover on GitLab 15. So Hillary, Kenny, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it. You're welcome anytime, and we can't wait to see how all of you are going to use these updates and how they might improve your experience and your workflow, and even more importantly, get your feedback about what else you want to see and how that experience can get even better. That goes for anyone that's involved in the DevOps lifecycle, right? The folks that are doing data science to support modern applications, security and compliance, right? We talked about that. Folks that are involved in enterprise and agile planning and workflow automation, right? There's a lot of folks we might not think of traditionally as developers, but then developers too, right? We want to bring observability and tooling to developers to make them more efficient as well. And so really excited about that. I would also love for you all to join us at our GitLab 15 launch event. This is Thursday, June 23rd at 8 a.m. Pacific. So hopefully folks in Europe and on the East Coast like myself, as well as folks on the West Coast of the US can join us. We're going to talk about the future of DevOps, our vision for the One DevOps platform, and going to discuss how GitLab can help you advance your DevOps career outside of just software. And so, again, thanks so much for watching today. We hope to see you there at that launch event. You can find me on the internet, most places at O'Leary Crew. Twitter is where I spend most of my time. So if you have an idea for a future episode or something you want to discuss from today's episode in more detail, you can reach out to me there. And again, the lab is produced monthly. So, come back next month to see what's happening with GitLab 15.1 and what we've been able to deliver on as we deliver this vision for GitLab 15. And thanks again for joining us. I'll see you next month in the lab. Stay safe.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
The software industrial revolution has arrived. Software used to be built, proprietary, and now it's more assembled than it is built, really. It's maybe 20% custom software that performs individual business functions, and it's sitting on a substrate of 80% of third-party dependencies and libraries that provide common behavior and operationalization for those particular units of work. And what that's led to really is this explosion in the ability to develop new experiences for customers, new business critical functionality to innovate faster than ever. This is actually a hidden infographic back for one organization we were talking to not too long ago. In both 1997 and 2014, they had around 40 repositories, source code repositories, and 70 engineers. And today, they still have 70 engineers, but have 900 source repositories. So you've got this 25 times explosion in the amount of software or custom software inside the organization. The team has delivered new experiences, has delivered a whole new product line, has expanded to other parts of the country, but don't have any more engineers working. They just have 25 times the amount of code. So if any given repository requires a certain level of maintenance and upkeep just to keep it working and running smoothly, then a 25 times growth in your total code base means really a 25 times growth in that maintenance activity as well. And as we talked to various organizations, we found different ways of measuring this, but it seems like it's about 30% of engineering time these days are spent doing that, keeping the lights on maintenance activity, really, that's necessary. After all, these third-party libraries and dependencies evolve at their own pace, independent of your business and your customers' needs. And not keeping up leads to critical bugs and failures and security vulnerabilities and so forth. So it's as important as ever as it is to keep it up to date. One thing we've also noticed is that maintenance activities are highly repeatable, really. And that's not surprising. After all, if our code base is 80% third party, there's going to be a lot of commonality in the components that we use across industries, across company sizes and so forth. And so the activities are actually be very similar. And wherever you find a high degree of repeatability in some sort of effort, there's an implication that the activity is ripe for automation. And I do think that software maintenance, the actual tedious work necessary to keep things running, is at a point now where automation is necessary to manage the sizes of code bases that we have. So, just myself, I started working on automatic refactoring at Netflix back in 2016 as part of the engineering tools team. But then, moved on and got to experience the software engineering organizations of a lot of different types of industries, working for the Spring team at Pivotal. And these days I have, with the folks I've worked with in the past, have started a new company really around this audit remediation. And it's based on an open source technology called Open Rewrite, which is really forked from the original Netflix code base. And we're going to see that today and how you can write recipes to automatically fix code in a style preserving way. And then there's also a platform around that that runs those recipes at scale on up to hundreds of millions of lines of code. And so as I want to go at this from sort of outside in and show you, first of all, the platform and how we can take a recipe and run it across, a lot of code and the kind of experience that creates. But then don't want to focus too much time on that. And instead we'll go over and actually write a recipe and see what that looks like and what that activity could look like. Because I know this is a very new field, really. So first of all, this company is called Modern, and we address software maintenance automatically. And again, we're leveraging Open Rewrite. So what you see here in this graphic is really just one change to a Spring Boot application that was previously on Spring Boot 1 and needed to move to Spring Boot 2. And the library has had some underlying change, or that a breaking change that you had to take, in this case, this conditional on being, and split it into a separate class that implements any nested condition. And this same kind of change would occur anywhere that functionality was used. So one characteristic of what we're going to see with these recipes as they make suggested changes to code bases is that it's really important that they preserve the original style of the code base. So we may run this on 10 repositories or 100 or 1,000, and there could be substantial variation in the white space rules and import ordering and these sorts of things that seem like trivialities, but are very important to us as software engineers working on individual projects. We like to see that consistency. So these recipes are really are good at actually maintaining that style. I'm going to flip over now actually to the platform, and let's just start with something. We're going to run one recipe on our own code base, our own Open Rewrite code base, and see what happens. So over here, what we see is the Modern platform, and this is a catalog, a tree view of recipes that are available all in open source, and they span. We can automatically fix Terraform or Kubernetes or Java, and a heavy emphasis on Java right now. And let's go into just the cleanup category of Java and look at common static analysis issues. So one characteristic of recipes is that recipes, as a unit of transformation, say, I want to fix all common static analysis issues in my project. Recipes can actually depend on other recipes. And so you can, just like any form of encapsulation, you can build up a higher and higher order functionality by assembling components together. In this case, common static analysis issues depends on a bunch of individual recipes that do different things, like looking for covariant equals or explicit initialization. And these are actually associated to, in this case, SonarQube issues that, you may have something like this running in your environment. SonarQube, of course, just reports issues. We've been looking at a lot of these rules provided by common static analysis tools and, reproducing the experience of finding violations, but at the same time also automatically fixing them or providing an automatic fix for them. So it's just kind of the next evolution in what it means to build this kind of code intelligence. So I've pre-selected the 21 repositories of Open Rewrite organization, and we'll take we'll actually have assembled a few other things here in a custom recipe that that I've created, and we're going to run this on those 21 repositories. So what we're operating on here is actually a sort of pre-compiled representation of the code in abstract syntax tree form. We'll talk more about that in a little bit, but it allows us to run a recipe very quickly on up to hundreds of millions of lines of code and see that result very quickly. So here's some of the repositories where, some of them there are no results found at all, and some of them require some cleanup. So kind of clicking into one of them, you'll see, the typical kind of static analysis issue that might be found. This one isn't super interesting, I know, but just that as field access.getSimpleName could have returned a null. And so if it's on the left side of this dot equals, then that could lead to a null pointer exception. So if we flip the literal to the front, then it no longer can create an MPE. So we've just sort of eliminated a class of potential bug here. And there's going to be similar results on other repositories. In this case, we found a field that had a default value that really, it's implicitly false if you don't say anything. So we can just clean this up a little bit. And so here's, I think we've found about so far 8 repositories of changes to make. And so as a contributor on this project, I can just say commit all 8 of these results. And we wait for GitHub for a little bit here. So what the platform is actually doing is cloning each one of these 8 repositories, taking the results that Open Rewrite has suggested and applying them to those repository on disk, then committing the end result. So it committed all 8 successfully. And if I click into one of them, what we see is actually the change that we saw in the platform there with the actual change made. And note the actual author here is me. It's Jonathan. I'm the one that ran the recipe. I controlled this process. I reviewed it. And so I'm responsible ultimately for the result here. But what it did make me is very efficient. I just fixed all the static analysis issues across 8 repositories. And in the process, it says saved, roughly 2 hours of time according to SonarQube's estimate, or 23 hours if we include this last repository it just popped in. And I'm done, right? I've just done that very effectively and kind of move on. That's kind of exciting, so you could kind of sense, I hope you're developing a sense that the changes actually can be very small things like, inverting the order of things, or they can be very structural changes. There's a lot of possibilities here. So how does this work? Like maybe just a little bit more about the actual data model itself. And I'll flip back to the slide. So if we're going to build this kind of source code automation, we need a lot of intelligence about the code itself. And not surprisingly, we're starting with the text version of the code and we're turning it into an abstract syntax tree. But this abstract syntax tree of Open Rewrite is special. It includes all the formatting of the original code, all the type attribution, all the stuff the compiler knew about as it was, downloading dependencies or applying dependencies and compiling. So ultimately, the data model is super rich. It's not just, we're not doing text search. We're not doing syntactic analysis. We're doing a form of analysis that involves the syntax, the types, the formatting, dependencies, Java version, environment variables that came into this build. All sorts of things are kind of being mixed in this rich stew that gives us the ability to perform these changes in a style preserving and accurate manner. We tried to, we actually render, this is a file from the Spring Cloud project, one of the Spring Cloud projects. We tried to actually render every piece of metadata that Open Rewrite puts on the tree and had to omit 600,000 nodes that we just couldn't somehow stuff into this representation and get to render on a laptop. So, and idea here, I guess, just it feels very magical what these recipes are doing, but behind the scenes is just a lot of hard work and a lot of data. So pretty cool. I think it'd be fun to actually write a recipe and kind of get a sense of what that looks like. So that, because, as we work with many organizations, both, with open source and with as a company, a lot of organizations write custom recipes. They have internal platforms, platform libraries and APIs, and it's just as important to maintain those as it is to maintain third-party open source dependencies and libraries as well. So I'll flip over to IntelliJ, and we'll try to write something that's that expresses some of the capability. So here we're going to rewind some of this here. We've all kind of encountered this log for shell thing now, right? That logging statements can be an issue, and it'd be one thing to try to write a recipe. We can write recipes to actually manipulate dependencies themselves, but what if we just went and, one just kind of like joke here would be to look for all logging statements and just replace them with runtime exceptions, because then you can't be vulnerable to remote code execution if your code is crashing. So I guess that's the joke, but at least it'll show some of this capability. So here we've really just noticed, first of all, that this is a class. We're going to say blame the boss, and you'll see why in a moment. But it's just it's a program, really. A recipe in Open Rewrite is not a query. It's not a SQL-like query. It's not a query language. It's actually a program, and those programs run in a very horizontally scalable manner as needed. So, we're going to do a visit over code. We're going to navigate the abstract syntax tree of this code, and we're going to do some things here. So let's get a method matcher for like log4j. We're going to look for method like log4j type methods. I think we've got some similar method matchers probably already if we look in the right place. So we've got a recipe is actually just a program. It's not a query. It's not a SQL-like query. It's actually a program that runs in a horizontally scalable manner across these abstract syntax trees. So that's the first thing to note. And so then the expressive power of what you can do with the recipe is really kind of based on what you can do in a program. So it's very, it's highly capable in that sense. We're going to need to look for logging statements if we want to replace them. So we can use something called a method matcher, which in this case, we're going to look for any implementation of category with any method name, that's the star, and an object in any, or really just any parameters probably would be fine here. And if we look at we could create a visitor, and a visitor is just going to navigate down the actual abstract syntax tree and look for things. And I'm going to visit method invocations. So these are actual calls to methods. And I'm going to say if log dot matches method. So I don't really need to know how to parse apart the method invocation itself. We can just match on this matcher up here. Then what we want to do is like take a log.info, something like this, and replace it with, we're going to say runtime exception, because, my boss told me to, or something. That we don't want remote code execution, this kind of thing. Again, kind of a bit of a joke here. But so we're going to replace this with something that looks very different. And I don't want to build up the abstract syntax tree of this new statement and this literal and this throw. And so we can use something called Java template in this case. And Java template allows us to build code snippets and then inject them into the AST in certain places. And so we're going to get the current cursor here. This needs to be down here, actually. And so we're going to build a code snippet that says throw new runtime exception. And actually, recipes can take parameters, and we'll see what that looks like in a moment. But let's say, because somebody, and we'll use this as a parameter, told me to. And so here, to replace the log, the log statement with a thrown exception, we could say method.withTemplate, and our template is the exception that we want to use. And we're saying, I'm going to get the coordinates of this method, and I'm just going to say, I just want to replace the whole thing. And my parameter, let's go define a parameter here. We can say option. Recipes can have options. Let's say our manager's name. And we'll make this a string here. So I can use this down here, manager name. And that's it. I just have to return this. So this can be final. And that really is the recipe. Let's look at what it means to test something like this. So here, I've written the recipe here. I want to test it. We have a whole unit testing harness around this. I've got the before, I've got the after sort of pre-written here. And so, there's a lot of detail here, but we construct a Java parser to actually parse the code itself. And you can see that even in this unit test here, this is syntax highlighted. And I'm saying, I want to use my new blame the boss recipe, and my manager's name is John. And what did I use for the text over here? I said, because John told me to, is what, So we can replace this here. And so I should be finding this logger.fatal and replacing it with this runtime exception. And that passes. So that's the technique. So you can imagine just creating these unit tests for various different circumstances that would occur in real code. And again, because of, we put a lot of work into making sure that the IDE even provides completion hints inside of the tests that you're writing, even though those tests are strings. So you can really go and kind of go crazy with this, actually testing it and making it really effective. So I've actually taken this, just like any good cooking show where they've baked something in advance. I've taken this recipe here and built it into an artifact and deployed that over on the platform we showed earlier. And so let's just run this, across a bunch of different things. It showed up in this logging category over here, where we called it, I think at that time, eliminate the possibility of remote code execution. And I'm just going to run this on absolutely everything that we have and say, my name's John. Let's see, my manager's name is Jonathan. And So you notice that the recipe option that we included over here actually just showed up as a dynamic form over here on the platform. And when we run it, we'll just get to see what that does, to code bases. So maybe we'll filter this here, just looking for things that we actually find, and just ignore everything else. And yeah, sure enough, I had this logger.info and now I'm throwing a runtime exception instead. So obviously you would want to build a much more sophisticated recipe on the end, but using these kind of tools that built around templating and matching and finding, and there's so much you can do to build really sophisticated things very quickly. And yeah, just maybe show something different, outside of the Java world. Let's look at something like Maven. And this really excites me, this idea of being able to manage dependencies in this way. Like Jackson, we know in the Java community has always been tough on us maintenance-wise because, and for no fault of their own, there's often deserialization gadget vulnerabilities that are found in Jackson. And the author has been fantastic about going back to old minor releases and releasing patches to fix that vulnerability over time. But it's also the kind of library where if you have like half of the application running on one minor version like 2.10 and one running on 2.9, you're in trouble. So we have added things like version constraints don't actually exist in Maven or Gradle, called like latest.patch, that knows how to look for something and determine whether there's like already whether there's a later version that's in the same minor release but is of a later patch version. I think that's really exciting too, to be able to kind of cater the actual dependency fix to each repository, meeting it where it is. So if we click into any one of the results here, we'll just see what we find. And yeah, you see like this one here used, Jackson 2.11, and we pulled it from 2.11.1 to 2.11.4. And, here, this one was back on 2.8. So the real fix is to pull it up to 2.8.11. So that it could be manipulating a property. You could have to manipulate a dependency management section or inline it, or there's all sorts of variation on what it means to pull something forward. But that's something that we can progressively encapsulate into what it means to upgrade a Maven dependency, all that tribal knowledge that our developer tools people especially have, and that, the typical product engineer doesn't have as much, and use it and deploy that knowledge across, the code base at large. It's super exciting. The world that I would love to see evolve here is one where actual framework authors, if you're the maintainer of Kubernetes, or you're the maintainer of Spring Boot, or you're the maintainer of Micronaut, that you would, when you make breaking changes, that you would provide recipes and open source that would help your users move forward. And, one team that's done a really great job of this is actually the Micronaut team at Oracle. If you look at their latest guide, they did a major release recently to 3.x from their 2.x line, and did a lot of the work necessary to write recipes such that you could just apply this recipe to a code base that was on Micronaut 2 and just run on it with a build tool locally. And that repository would have been migrated forward to Micronaut 3 largely. What a world we would be in if every vendor or vendors really took responsibility when they made breaking API changes to do the little work necessary to provide the recipe downstream of them. And these things really have a stacking effect. So if we look at say like in the testing world, we look at JUnit Jupyter and what it means to go from JUnit 4 to JUnit 5. That recipe, you don't only have to deal with JUnit things, but you also have to upgrade, Mockito 1 to 3. You have to deal with Hamcrest assertions. You have to deal with mock web server and OKHTTP. So a lot of these sort of changes are stitched together. So if you're a library author out there, I challenge you to start thinking in this way: is what can you do to help your user base move forward and get better? I really appreciate you taking the time to join our conference today, and look forward to engaging with you further. Thank you.
Hey everybody, happy Thursday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with headlines. Kicking off today's lineup, the US Congress recently held a series of hearings focusing on artificial intelligence and machine learning applications in cybersecurity operations. Representatives from Google, Microsoft, and the Center for Security and Emerging Technology at Georgetown University presented testimony which highlighted the increasing talent shortage and ensuring that AI and machine learning systems are trustworthy, some of the biggest concerns in the industry currently. Some among the topics discussed during the May hearing were the ways AI can be useful to the Department of Defense, the increasing cybersecurity skills shortage, and ways in which AI itself is vulnerable. Dr. Andrew Lone, Senior Fellow in the Cyber AI project at CSET, touched on the benefits of AI, but also cautioned that some of the existing systems from where AI is adapted may be untrustworthy, leaving inherent vulnerabilities. The hearings closed with advice for both government agencies and private sector companies to double down on attention and investments regarding threats and opportunities at the convergence of AI and cybersecurity. And in DevOps news, an emerging open source standard from the Continuous Delivery Foundation called CD Events is aiming to standardize continuous integration and continuous delivery interoperability. CD Events is described as a common specification for continuous delivery events to address the current lack of interoperability, as no single tool covers everything from managing source code to production. CD Events organizes events into 4 main buckets: core events, source code version control, CD events, and CI events. CD events could reduce the time and energy it takes to write and maintain glue code between common DevOps tools, allowing for smoother integration. Although the project is still in early stages of development, CD events could be the future of standardization. Interesting. All right, in other news, the M1 chip developed by Apple is reported to have a flaw that can't be fixed. The vulnerability lies in a hardware level security mechanism called pointer authentication codes. Researchers from MIT's Computer Science and AI Laboratory created a novel hardware attack that shows the weakness in the pack. The attack can defeat the pack without leaving a trace, and because it exploits a hardware weakness, no software update can fix it. The attack, titled Pac-Man, uses speculative execution, a technique used by modern computer processes to speed up performance by guessing various lines of computation. The researchers were even able to prove the attack works against the OS kernel. With Apple using pointer authentication on all of its custom ARM-based silicon so far, this could have major security implications. Although the vulnerability poses a threat to Apple products, it isn't a magic bypass for all security on the chip, as it can only take an existing bug that pointer authentication protects against. However, MIT researchers noted that if the weakness isn't mitigated, the attack will affect the majority of mobile devices and desktops for years to come. All right, Google has placed one of its researchers on leave after his claims that the Lambda AI system has become sentient. The language model for dialogue applications, or Lambda, is an innovative technology that can engage in free-flowing conversations. However, engineer Blake Lemoine thinks the AI chatbot has become a sentient being. To support his claims, Lemoine published a conversation he and a colleague had with Lambda, in which the AI chatbot claimed to be aware of its existence and that it has a very deep fear of being turned off, which would be something like death for it. It also said it experiences happy and sad feelings and other statements that convinced Lemoine of its sentience. Brian Gabriel, a spokesperson for Google, wrote in a statement that Lemoine was told there was no evidence that Lambda was sentient, and there was lots of evidence against it. Many experts across the industry claim that Lambda's dialogue comes as a result of the large language model and many pre-trained words it's programmed with. Lambda tends to follow along with prompts and can follow patterns set by users, which may be an explanation for the dialogue. So, although Lemoine's claims are interesting and maybe even concerning, whether Lambda is actually sentient is still very much up in the air. And speaking of Google, the company has been very busy patching 7 Chrome browser bugs, with 4 being rated as high risk. According to an alert by the US Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, or CISA, attackers could exploit vulnerability in Chrome for Windows, Mac, and Linux to take control of an affected system. To prevent the security vulnerabilities from being exploited, CISA advises users to update to the latest version of Chrome. One of the high-risk vulnerabilities is a use after free, or UAF vulnerability, which allows attackers to exploit incorrect use of dynamic memory during program operation. Another vulnerability is an out-of-bounds memory access in WebGL, a JavaScript API used in Chrome, which allows attackers to read sensitive information without being granted access. Google also discovered another UAF vulnerability in Angle, an open source cross-platform graphics engine abstraction layer used in the back end of Chrome. All right, that's it for the headlines this time around. I'll be back next time with a brand new batch for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and TechstrongTV.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to TechstrongTV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Michael Hunger, who is the Senior Director of Use Innovation over at Neo4j. Michael, thank you so much for taking a few minutes and joining me today. I do appreciate it.
Happy to join you, Charlene.
Excellent, excellent.
Join you. Yeah.
Well, I'm thrilled that you're here because I want to talk to you about a topic that I'm sure you're very close to, which is tool sprawl and the things that organizations can do to kind of help, if not mitigate tool sprawl, at least contain it a little bit and manage it a little bit more effectively. Yeah. But first, before we get started on our conversation, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about Neo4j.
Yes, I can, because I've been around Neo4j for a very long time. So I actually started when we were back in the times, 12 years ago, we were 10 people. It was 7 Swedes, 1 American, 1 British, and me, the German. And so we started this startup around graph databases. So basically a database that's really well suited for storing that kind of data that is very highly connected. So things that you would draw on a whiteboard, social networks, transport routes, all these kind of very highly connected data sets. And so that was 12 years ago. And now 12 years later, we are at a unicorn startup, basically well-funded, lots of people around the world, interesting use cases and customers. And it's amazing to see a product growing like from its inception all the way to a global platform. And it's just amazing to be part of the journey. And I'm really happy that Neo4j also has a company culture that makes people stick. So we have kind of really low fluctuation. People stick around, want to see it succeeding. And so there's also lots of friendships and almost like my family, my work family that
that's great.
There.
That's great.
And, it's really a nice technology, very, very easy to understand for even non-developers, because it's the things that you can draw on a whiteboard. Circles and arrows are basically your entities. And then it's basically what you see on your whiteboard is the same what you have in a database, but it's real database on the other side. So you can do all the things that you can do in a database with the data. So it's really, really powerful.
It sounds like. Well, that's great, and because you guys are pretty much in the thick of things when it comes to developer tools and technologies. Let's talk about tool sprawl, because it seems like it is a growing problem. No pun intended there. But it's a lot of organizations now are kind of dealing with tool sprawl. I would imagine, especially in light of the pandemic and everybody working remotely these days. Do you guys see tool sprawl as becoming a larger problem?
I think there's definitely some level of it that people during the pandemic started to explore new technologies, new tools. And of course, if you take it too easy and let everyone use whatever they want to use, then you get a ton of tools used in your products, not because they're useful or because they add value, but just because someone wanted to learn something, right? And so, which is, in general, it's something good that people want to learn new technologies, right? And IT, as we all know, is adding new tools, new technologies, new libraries every day. So people should stay on top of things that are happening. The question is, should they use every tool that they just heard about on their social media the next day in their product, right? So that's kind of the question. So can we give people safe spaces where they can learn, explore new things, and grow experience, and then with a kind of informed decision, basically talking with their team, talking with their PM to make a case for this makes sense to use this tool, course ABC, and I did an evaluation. And so it's a more conscious decision versus just, there's this new toy and I just grab it and pull it in. And because after all, we need to remember we all leave a legacy, right? Every tool that we add to our tech stack leaves a legacy. Someone needs to understand it, maintain it over many years. And I was in a conversation once where someone said, I'd rather have my people spend an hour on social media than writing code that we need to maintain that's actually not necessary, right? So, and similar with tools, I'd rather have someone, be somewhere else and try things for themselves in a safe space than just pulling it in and creating like a maintenance burden for the organization as such. Right?
Yeah, I've seen arguments and I've heard arguments for enabling developers to go out and find their own tools and use the tools that they're comfortable with and the ones that they believe they will be most productive with.
Yeah.
But on the other side, to your point, that leads to a lot of maybe mismatch, if you will, in an organization. Yeah. And you've got 5 different tools that do one thing. All do the same thing, and so that person leaves, and he happened or she happened to be the only person using that tool.
That's the challenge, right? The bus number. How many people can understand it?
Exactly. So how can an organization effectively kind of mitigate or reduce the amount of tool sprawl that they're dealing with, but still keep their developers happy? That seems to be a difficult thing for organizations to accomplish.
It's something to balance, right? So I think if the organization is proactive in encouraging their employees to learn new tools and give them a space and the time and the ability to do that, then it's really valuable, right? So because then you're not, it's not something that happens accidentally, but it's something that's basically part of an strategy, basically, of an employment education strategy as well, right? So you say, okay, we are fully aware that all these tools exist, that all the new things are coming down the line, and we want to encourage you to learn those. But here's a safe environment. Here's, say, 10% time or something like that. Or here is a set of projects that we can try these tools in, but it's not like the production code, but it's something that like testing infrastructure or or other things where you say, okay, this is something where we can try out new things without them going into the main line, for instance, right? And something that I also really like is when you pair people. So when someone wants to learn a new tool, someone else probably has already some experience with the tool. So you have like a mentor relationship or like a pairing relationship where it's not just one person learning the tool, but two people together. So they basically also support each other, can also encourage them to actually finish the learning, not just like start 20 new projects basically, but get something also over the finish line. But then you already have a pair of people knowing the technology, right? So, and then a pair of people has two different pairs of eyes looking at it. And so from that perspective, they can make a much more informed decision as well. Does it make sense to look further at this tool or not? And that's something that we, for instance, at NEO did. We introduced a mentorship program where people can sign up to be mentors or mentees. And then if there's some topic that's interesting to both, they can pick it up and say, hey, I would really like to spend a day or two learning this new tool. You already know something about this. Can we work together? And then basically it's a good learning experience for both of them. And I think that's a useful way of working on that.
I think that's a great idea, and having more than one person, to your point, kind of makes the whole experience a lot more objective on whether that particular tool truly can work for the organization. And then if they do decide to adopt it, you have more than one person who actually knows the tool, who can still use it if the other person leaves. I think that's a great idea. So, But is two people enough, though? I mean, if we're talking...
that's an interesting question, right? So, I mean, the other thing with modern infrastructure that I really like is that nowadays many components and systems are self-contained, right? So you have a microservices service, an API that forms like a frame around something or like a shell around something, right? So from the outside, it's not so important what runs on the inside, right? And with containers, things are also encapsulated, so you can run whatever runs on the operating system. So from that perspective, you can also say, hey, the team is responsible for maintaining the service, let's say the service. Then it's also the team's responsibility to choose the technologies, also technologies that they're comfortable maintaining and supporting and running the pager and doing the 24/7 support for that as well. And because to the outside, you only expose APIs. So whoever consumes those APIs doesn't care what's running under the hood because that technology is hidden away from the APIs. And that also means if really push comes to shove and no one is there anymore because let's say the whole team left for whatever reason, and there's no one there anymore to maintain it, you still have the API definitions, you know what a service is meant to behave like. And if the cut is small enough, then you can also say, hey, this is kind of part of delivered learning. And we learn basically how to build this service, so we can also build it a second time with another set of technologies. So then North has a really good explanation about this, where it's basically, when you build a project once, then most of the learning is actually about the domain and about the business concepts and things like that. If you have to build the same project a second time with a different technology, you're actually much faster building it, right? So because then you have done all the learnings, and then it's basically more like just doing the coding. But then you can make choices. For instance, you realize this one technology was actually not a good fit, and then the second time you can make a better choice, for instance. But the really important part is that the services are small cut and isolated from each other and have an API. So from the outside, they're interchangeable. And that's also what Amazon does, right? So their teams are not allowed to talk about the internals of their services with each other. They're only allowed to talk about the APIs because that's kind of leaky abstractions. Then you don't want to leak the internals. And then actually, it's not so much the number of tools that you limit, it's more the sprawl aspect that you limit, right? So which is also an interesting approach there. They say, okay, we trust our teams, but then they need to make sure that whatever they're using is not leaking outside of their service or their component as such, which I find also really interesting.
Yeah, that's actually something that I hadn't thought about, but it sure makes a lot of sense. When you're talking about, especially within larger organizations where you have many multiple teams working on a project, I imagine doing it that way, where you actually have these teams that are hyper focused on just kind of what they're doing and speaking in APIs rather than the actual tools. That actually probably solves not only a development productivity or workflow issue, but also security, any security issues that might crop up as well.
Exactly, because of the isolation, each service is basically on, and you kind of secure the APIs. And if you have security APIs, that's kind of how the surface of the surface looks like. So whatever security issues have to go through the APIs. So there's no backdoor or other things. So you have a really clean surface as well that you need to basically pen test and secure. And that's where you kind of make the choices, right? And if the service, for instance, imagine you're a startup that starts out with a number of services, and then suddenly you're successful and your services have to scale. And it turns out that one of the technology choices that you made is not as scalable as you thought in the first place, right? So, but then you can say, hey, out of our 100 services, perhaps 5 are really under load and have to scale massively. So then we can take these 5 services independent of the other ones and replace them with a better implementation, and which is much more scalable. And then, but you don't have to touch the whole system. You only have to touch the ones that are actually really under pressure, basically, as such. And that's a nice thing as well. And that it's also a really nice opportunity for people as your company grows and as the user count grows and your startup is successful, also to explore new technologies that they might not have needed before, that they now suddenly need because there's really different requirements from the non-functional and from the business side as well, which is also a good problem to have, of course. But you also want to be prepared, right? So you don't want to basically run into the wall and then everything breaks down. You want to be prepared. So you have to also give your people the opportunity to learn, explore, and do things on the side, because otherwise they only know what they've been doing for the last 5 years. And then if a new challenge comes along, then what do they do, right? But if they have learned while they're working on their main system, then they are prepared and they can say, yeah, I tried this. We kind of built an example service with this technology and it scales so much better than what we have. And this is kind of our proposal of how we can redo this, and then it's more a conscious decision again as a team, and so I really like that. By the way, there's a really cool tool. I just remember that there's a really cool tool called architecture design records or decision records, basically, which write up why you choose to use which technology. So, and these records are actually part of your software version control system. So whenever you kind of make decisions about technologies, tools, choices of infrastructure, you actually write them up as decision records and basically store them with your code. So when someone later comes along and says, why did you use this tool? Why did you use this technology? You can actually point them to the decision record where the team agreed and wrote down why they chose the technology. So it's not this kind of folklore anymore, or this kind of in between where no one really knows why. I found this really useful because that makes these kind of decisions explicit and written down. So that's a great tool to use.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like a great idea, and even without the technology itself, I think having some sort of documentation explaining how you're using the tool and how it's positively impacting the organization, I think is always a good thing. Always a good thing. Well, tool sprawl is one of those topics that I feel like we're always going to be having a conversation about tool sprawl because there are so many technologies out there. Yeah, exactly. Entropy. That's the best word I've heard about it. Yeah. So, I don't think that we'll ever stop talking about tool sprawl simply because, every project is a unicorn project, right? There's you can't replicate any project to different organizations and different end users and different use cases. So
that's a good question, right? So lessons learned you can probably take away, but then each setup is unique, and also the people are unique that work together in a project, right? So something that might have worked in your last project because the people were in a certain way, had certain backgrounds, might not work in the next project because you're working with different people and different contexts, right? So and so from that perspective, it's basically capture the patterns, capture lessons learned, and then you need to reapply them in your context after all. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, Michael, thank you so much for having the conversation with me. Like I said, I think we'll be talking about this again in the future. So I certainly welcome you back to come back. Yeah. Cool. Yay. Okay. All right. Great. Cool. Well, thanks again for your time today. I do appreciate it. All right, everybody. Okay. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechstrongTV coming up, so stay tuned.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechstrongTV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Jim Barkdahl, who is the CEO of Axiomatics. Jim, thank you so much for taking some time and joining me today. I do appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Charlene. It's great to be here. Appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Well, I am interested in talking to you about zero trust security and NIST guidelines and how organizations can navigate these choppy waters that we are in when it comes to cybersecurity and making sure that they are compliant with some of the NIST guidelines. But first, before we dive into that, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about Axiomatics.
Yeah, that would be great. I appreciate that, Charlene. Axiomatics is the leader in dynamic authorization. We're a 15-year-old organization based out of Stockholm, Sweden, with offices all throughout the world. And more importantly, mostly Global 1000 customers spread across the world that have had to tackle the need of the issue that we'll talk a little bit about today, access, and making sure that secure access is given to the right people at the right time, in the right place, et cetera.
Great. So let's go ahead and kind of back up the conversation a little bit for a little bit of a background. What's actually happening when it comes to cybersecurity and I don't want to say government involvement because it sounds like Big Brother, but with everything that's been going on over the last year or so, we have been hearing about executive orders coming down from the White House regarding cybersecurity, and NIST has now come out with some new guidelines. So can you give us a little bit of background on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, NIST is a over 120-year-old organization itself. More recently, obviously, in recent history, of course, with the advent of the internet, it's been focused high on security, and even more so in recent years, of course, cybersecurity, right? With all of the issues that we're talking about geopolitically or economically or just in general running a good business. But NIST, if you look at kind of the concept you talked about there about government intervention or Big Brother. In this instance, this is really good government, in my opinion. NIST has collaborated with all facets of business, not just government, and they've really tried to put in place a best practices guideline. If you're going to build your organization and you care about security, that this is a guideline, a framework that you can follow and put into practice.
Okay. And then so, as how does that relate then to these executive orders that have come out of the White House?
I think what you're really seeing, first of all, the executive orders are not, they're not punitive. They're meant to be helpful, right? So if you look at especially the unfortunate circumstances in Ukraine and the concern about the militarization of cybersecurity, which has always been going on, but highlighted more and more when it's put into battle. Of course, the White House is saying and looking and saying we're all vulnerable. So if we can say this is a best practices from a government perspective, and anyone that's dealing with the government, you should follow these policies, and we're going to start to inspect and ask that you follow these policies. And then outside of that, this is really a best practices for everyone, that whether you're dealing with a government entity or not, this is really a fantastic framework that's put together by experts inside the government with input from leaders in some of the largest technology companies in the world.
Okay, so you mentioned access at the top of the conversation. Let's talk about that in the parameters of zero trust security and how that fits in with these NIST guidelines. What exactly are we talking about when we are talking about access, and how does it kind of fit into the whole picture?
Yeah, so if you look at NIST best practices, certainly now the big buzzword that every software or security company talks about is zero trust. Mm-hmm. Zero trust is a core tenet embedded inside NIST, and the best practice is to get to a zero trust framework. The two key starters or kind of base policies that you need to put in place for zero trust is, number one, authentication, which is based around the identity. Is this a person or device who or what he or she says she is? And then the next step would be authorization. Authorization in this case then is, all right, I've validated that this individual is who I think they are, and now authorization is, what do I want to let this person do inside this in this application or with this data? That's very different than where we came before. Certainly cloud and all the new technologies we have, which you could use what we've historically used for 30 years, which would be more based on role-based. I'm this position, I should get this access into the company. I'm inside a firewall or a VPN, and I'm safe. And there's very little chance of leaking certain types of sensitive information or activities. Now, that's certainly not the case. The pandemic certainly accelerated kind of the killing of the VPN, which is a popular hashtag out there, kill the VPN. But it really exposed this risk of people that we have remote, whether they're employees or customers. What do I want them doing on my system? And now that I'm, created more and more data every day, I've got technologies like microservices where I'm exposing more sensitive information. Do I want to control that access? And the answer is yes. And so NIST vis-a-vis then zero trust, best practices: authenticate, know who you're talking to, and then authorize. Let's create a security policy that says, what's my risk tolerance? What do I want to allow people to do or access inside my application?
So I understand the whole idea behind zero trust, and we've been talking about it for almost 2 years now, maybe even longer than that. I think we actually started talking about zero trust before the pandemic, and then it really ramped up over the course of the last couple of years. But it seems like organizations, for the most part, they're lagging behind. They're not really adopting a lot of the zero trust principles and technologies that are really have proven themselves critical in today's cybersecurity threat landscape. So how much of a lift is this going to be for organizations to kind of be in that zero trust security mindset and within those NIST guideline parameters?
Yeah, it's a great question, Charlene. I don't know that it's a huge lift. It's more, it's a mindset, right? Is security important to my company, and am I looking at it as a checkbox, and I just want to say I'm secure, or do I really want to be secure? And that's what every organization has to decide, right? Zero trust is a large framework, and there's no one solution that solves it. There's no one policy that solves it. It's a collection of ideas that says, I'm going to now treat this in a zero trust mindshare. So, I would say it's not a heavy lift, but there's also a lot of confusion out there because we all talk about zero trust. Every provider out there wants to attach themselves to zero trust and say they're a zero trust vendor. And so I think there's a lot, unfortunately, for every company, every CISO out there, there's a lot of confusion. How do I get to a zero trust implementation?
Yeah, and if you ask 5 different people what zero trust means, you're going to get 5 different answers, right?
Well, undoubtedly, I think that's a great point.
Yeah. So I think to your point, there's a lot of confusion that still reigns when it comes to cybersecurity and zero trust, and certainly all of the hype around zero trust, especially during the pandemic, certainly hasn't helped things. So how can organizations then kind of separate the wheat from the chaff, if you will?
One of the things I've seen, certainly the pandemic hasn't helped. The unfortunate circumstances around the world haven't helped. Staffing issues are abound, right? So security personnel are in high demand. I know of one of our potential customers has a opening of 140 openings in security right now, right?
Wow.
So it's tough to find that staff. So my advice would be, there are integrators, there are expert cybersecurity technology providers out there, not necessarily a software provider, but the integrators that can come and help do some staff augmentation, do some planning, and really help the CISO, come up with his or her vision about the first steps of implementing zero trust.
Yeah, so get help. Basically, at the end of the day, it's like, don't try to do it yourself. Don't boil the ocean. Get the help you need from and I keep hearing that from a lot of organizations. It's like our cybersecurity strategy has become so complex because of all the threats out there that we just can't do it ourselves. And we really do need help from an MSSP or some other type of security provider, service provider.
Absolutely. And again, on that note, the staff we have are especially right now, a lot of them are in firefighting mode, especially when, when the war started, everyone was kind of scrambling, making sure is my antivirus up to speed, the kind of the plugging the low hanging fruit, if you will. And that was taking up a lot of time and still does take up a lot of the security time. So to try to put together another initiative against this tax team is very difficult. So you definitely have to have help to do it.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see whether these new NIST guidelines are going to really move the needle when it comes to not only corporations' security strategies, but basically the nation's cybersecurity strategy as well. Because I would imagine that we're going to see some changes up at the governmental level when it comes to cybersecurity as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm sure you're the same as me and every American or citizen of the world, for that matter. I want this technology. I want to be able to do these things. It makes my life simpler, but I want to know that my information is protected, right? So privacy policies aren't really enough, right? That only goes so far. That says kind of governs how information should be protected or what information should be sensitive, versus NIST, which is really, it is an organization that I'm dealing with following NIST best practices, and then I can feel better about it because they've done all of the grassroots efforts that say I've implemented a zero trust strategy and thus make it more difficult for bad actors or quite frankly just mistakes to happen.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll have to take a little bit of a wait and see attitude to see if we, if changes actually do happen and we see some improvements. But, in light of the fact that the cybersecurity threat landscape seems to be changing almost hourly, it seems like these days, we may not even recognize whether, changes have been made for the positive because as fast as we are, the cyber criminals seem to be even faster. But maybe that's another conversation for another time.
I agree. It's a great point.
All right. Great. Well, Jim, thank you so much for taking a few minutes and talking with me today about this very, very important topic. I do appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. I appreciate it. Thanks again for the time.
You bet. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechstrongTV coming up, so stay tuned. Hey, everybody. Happy Thursday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the webinars preview. I always tell you, we've got so many great webinars coming up on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. I got 3 here for you. Hopefully, you'll be able to mark your calendar and join us. The first one is called Why Cloud Native Applications and APIs Are at Risk. This one is happening Tuesday, June 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. It is sponsored by Bionic. Like every other organization, you probably have some sort of cloud transformation initiative. Whether you are just starting on your cloud journey or have fully adopted a cloud-first approach, there are a lot of things to think about. But have you thought about how to ensure the applications deployed to your production cloud environments stay secure and configured correctly? This webinar will focus on helping attendees understand the gaps in traditional cloud security, learn about the types of risk their cloud-based applications and APIs are prone to, and explore some new approaches to finding risk in cloud-based applications and APIs. Good one there. All right, the second one is called 4 Signs It Is Time to Level Up Prometheus. This one is happening Thursday, June 23rd at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This one is sponsored by Chronosphere. Prometheus was developed in 2012 in response to the growing need for cloud-native monitoring services. Its efficient data store and ease of use have made it the de facto open source metrics monitoring solution. By storing data locally on disk, Prometheus is great for short-term use cases. However, when storing and querying against longer-term and larger-scale data, it can easily become overwhelmed. This webinar takes a look at the 4 signs it is time to level up Prometheus by focusing on key measurements around your monitoring solution: efficiency, reliability, scalability, and cost. By focusing on these 4 indicators, the attendee, will leave with a better understanding of how to access monitoring data more quickly and efficiently, improve reliability to keep mission-critical services up and running, increase scale to retain more data for longer periods, and keep monitoring costs under control. All right, the third and final webinar is called Boost Your JavaScript Skills with a Multi-Experience Platform. This one is happening Wednesday, June 29th at 3 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This one is sponsored by HCL Volt MX. Are you a professional Java and/or JavaScript developer dealing with a growing backlog of apps? To stay ahead in a highly competitive digital landscape, organizations have seen an exponential growth in application development to support business operations, customer experiences, and more. And they need you. As apps move from concept to reality, they are often pulled in many directions by competing teams and stakeholders, ultimately leading to what we call the wall of complexity and scope creep. This webinar will focus on simplifying your app building experience with a multi-experience platform. Good stuff. All right, that's it for the webinar's preview. I'll be back another time with another batch for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Jason Maynor, who's the CISO for Kaseya, and we're going to be talking about security and law enforcement with a slightly different twist on it this time. Now, Jason, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
So you contend that one of the things that organizations should do to make their whole environment more secure is to go recruit cybersecurity professionals out of the FBI, government agencies, and other places. Why should they think about doing that? Because often there's at least a perception that says, the government can't afford the best talent. So maybe that's where people initially get schooled, but maybe there is some awesome talent hiding in those spots, and maybe it's affordable.
Yeah, I think in this kind of market, we're looking for talent in very unique places. I think the military and I think the federal government, whether it's the FBI, DHS, Secret Service, there's a number of federal agencies that require mandatory training and certifications to just do cyber investigations and cyber work. They spend tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to put people through an education, and oftentimes an education that normally private entities would put people through straight out of high school or college, wherever you may be finding folks these days. So my thing is you've got to find somebody that fits the organization and fits your environment, right? That's first and foremost. For me, that's finding people that are self-driven, that are motivated, that really have a work ethic second to none. And quite frankly, they have to kind of have that pendulum of work-life balance. They have to kind of shift it just a little bit towards work for us, just because we are growing at such a dramatic rate. It's a wonderful problem to have. So those are things that I personally look for as a CISO. And one of the things that a lot of people don't see behind the curtain is these are people that are battle tested a lot of times. So if you're talking about on the NSA side, if you're talking about the DHS side, or even if you're talking about the FBI side, you have people that have experienced and gone through, like myself, thousands of intrusions, has seen the good, bad, and the ugly, the tools that work, the tools that don't work, the companies that have had policies that have gotten it right, and unfortunately, policies that they have just not gotten right at all. It gives them a wonderful perception to be able to go in and make immediate recommendation and changes for the betterment of the organization. Now, because we're oftentimes sworn to secrecy, and because of the various companies that we work with that don't end up in the media or whatever else, we can't tell you about a lot of the cool cases that we've worked on. But I've worked with those individuals firsthand. There's a number of great people. But I'm also a realist. In any organization, you have good and bad apples. So it's incumbent upon that CISO, it's incumbent upon those executives to really do their due diligence and make sure that they're a fit for their organization.
Mm-hmm. Where should the agencies that lose people to the private sector go recruit new people to replace the people who just left?
Yeah. So believe it or not, it's really hard to recruit people from various agencies. There's a deep sense of patriotic pride. A lot of people in government service don't do it for the money. They do it for our country. They really want to stand on that wall. They want to protect our interest, our equities. They want to stand on that wall and make a difference, whether it's against nation states like China, Russia, or whether it's against those criminal elements and organizations that would just choose to victimize people for pure profit. And so one of those things that is keeping and holding people, I wouldn't say holding people back, but it's just that sense of duty. And I admire that. And I was one of those people for a very long time. It really was just a great fit here at Kaseya. And quite frankly, if it hadn't been for the executive team and Fred and the individuals that they are, along with my personal faith and belief, I wouldn't be where I'm at, because I'm one of those people that had many job opportunities, but yet chose service over the private sector.
Mm-hmm. I suppose, though, you can't stand on that wall forever. I mean, eventually you get tired and somebody needs to spell you out.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because that was actually part of my process. And gosh, it must be really good, because I've had several of these interviews and they haven't pulled it out of me. But I did get someone that kind of gave me that reality check in the FBI. They looked at me and I told them, I said, look, I really want to see my creds on the wall. I really want to retire. I want to see that shield. I want to know that I accomplished something. And they said, what haven't you accomplished? And they started going through my career and they started really helping me reality check the fact that in my 16 years, I had done what most people take 25 years to do. And I don't say that to brag or anything else. I was just very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time and have the right experience with the right mentors that have allowed me to experience the full breadth of the federal government.
We hear a lot about the threats that are out there, nation states to kids hanging out in their basement somewhere. It runs the gamut. What's your sense of the threat vector we're facing right now? Because on the one hand, people are like, oh my God, every nation state has its own, affiliates that are targeting us to, it's a lot of script kiddies and people don't take it so seriously. So between those two extremes, what's the right balance?
Well, wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't as transparent as I could be with you. Our organizations and entities are attacked by all of the above and in all angles. I saw a cartoon once that I think demonstrates it very well. And it shows all those threat actors that you just mentioned, from the script kiddies to, the activists to the nation state on the other side of a dam with a CISO holding his hands and his feet up against, a cracking wall. And oftentimes that's what it feels like, because we have so many threats coming at us at any given time. I would say that if you actually take a look back in history, there's always been those entities, those criminal elements that were traditionally attacking industries, even if it was your employee base walking in and it was a pickpocket on the side of the street, right, trying to get financial means from your employees. Well, now you're not going to necessarily get the pickpocket. You're going to get somebody that is going to do that online, that is the financially motivated cyber actor, right? It's just changed because the value and the currency has moved more digital. You're more likely to actually get something, more valuable by targeting someone online than you are necessarily to get their wallet. And so that's exactly what these actors have done. Same thing in nation states. You heard, you used to traditionally see in the 80s, and don't get me wrong, there are spies among us, but you would see, the spy in, the movie with the Americans or whatever that Russian popular TV show is about the Russian spies. You would see that in the 80s, and you would see drops and everything else, but it's become far more advantageous and easier to target people's network and to target individual credentials that would allow you access into the network. So the answer is all of the above. And the answer is we have to take a pragmatic approach at what the highest risk factor is at the culmination of all those threats. And what information tells us, IBM published a study not too long ago that 95% of all reported intrusions culminated in two areas. And those two areas was human error or it was misconfigurations. And so if we, focus on human error, and what they're talking about by human errors is they're talking about phishing, they're talking about social engineering, they're talking about the weakness in the human element. If we focus on that, if we continue to focus on configuration, ensuring we have the proper configuration alignment along with vulnerability management and patching, we are going to be setting ourselves up for a much stronger environment where we can visually see the attacker coming a lot sooner than if we didn't have those things in place. Now, I always say nothing's 100%. And I always say it's not a matter of if, but when. And I will continually say that. I said that for decades in the FBI. And I say that now as the CISO.
We all thought there would be some sort of cataclysmic attack emanating from Russia by now, but apparently not. So what's your sense of why we're not seeing that level of massive attack on critical infrastructure? It seems things are running low. I mean, I'm sure they're out there. They're just not running at this massive scale. We thought that might happen.
Right. So as of late, I actually have heard of ransomware picking back up. That had dropped in the first quarter to some extent versus a lot of what we saw in 2021. However, what I will say is whenever I see a period of what we would typically say quiet, I'm very nervous and concerned that is organizations actually organizing and preparing an offensive. So while I don't have a good plan and others can or a good idea of exactly what took place to do that, I will tell you that it did coincide. It seemed to coincide with the war in Ukraine, and it would make sense that the government may even try to, and I have no insider information on this, it's just my own personal thoughts, may try to actually, coalesce the criminal elements that they would know about for potential, government affairs and government offenses. Whether that's being done or not, again, just a personal gut feeling, it would explain why there had been, at least this quiet period. I'm not saying that's happening. I'm just saying it's a plausible, possibility.
What's your sense of, are we getting better at defending ourselves collectively? It seems like the government is organizing more of its efforts to disrupt some of these cyber gangs, and the Justice Department's going after their ill-gotten gains more aggressively. So that's all positive, but we are seeing more targeted attacks, and there's certainly more volume. So, are we winning or losing?
Right. So I agree that we're getting better, but I think the question is are we getting better at a rate in which the adversary is continuing to evolve? So are we keeping up with that evolution of the adversary? And are we adjusting quick enough? And in some areas, I would say absolutely. I would say that we still have to, whether it's myself or my colleagues, we still have to be as loud as we possibly can, have that direct line of communication with executive management and outline what those true critical risks are as they are associated with your own environment within your ecosystem, to ensure that the business is able to rack and stack those risks and resolve those accordingly.
Mm-hmm. Is it getting too much of a challenge for the average organization to fight this fight themselves? I remember talking to one fella, and he said, it's too important for us not to do it. But as I look at it now, maybe it's too important not to have somebody else do it.
Yeah. So you bring up a great point, and I think you see where the explosion of the MSP space is in. Because I talk to a lot of small and medium-sized entities and organizations, and that's exactly kind of where they're at. They're like, Jason, I don't know where to start. I don't know whether I should get my own team. I don't know whether I should outsource this. And basically, my advice is always, you have to start somewhere. You just can't say, what hasn't happened to me yet, so I'm going to bury my head in the sand and I'm not going to do anything about it. Take action. The worst thing you can do is not take action. I personally tell a lot of people that, the MSP space is exactly where you need to start as a small business, because especially when you're scaling, it's really hard to scale with the talent vacuum that is out there right now around cybersecurity experts. And, there's a lot of MSPs, and there's a lot of other sectors out there that are going to have some of that knowledge that they're going to be able to help you out with, or at least guide you on the areas and where to go.
Do you think AI will help fill some of that talent gap as we go along here? I mean, it seems like we're augmenting people. I don't think we're replacing folks, but will that level the playing field on some point?
So I think automation, the coolest thing about automation is I think it is going to reduce the gap on time to action. I don't know that it is ever going to replace the analyst or the engineer or even the CISO, but I think it is going to be able to quickly and efficiently, when you automate the process, stop an attacker in their tracks before they start propagating across the network. And that's one of the things that, we are constantly doing in our environment, is automating everything that we can, so that, as soon as anything would be detected as an anomaly, it is shut down until we can investigate it and ensure that it was something research and developer did or an engineer did, and it was something that was meant to be done and not something outside of our environment.
Mm-hmm. So ultimately, what's your best advice to folks? What should they be thinking about today? What do you wish that more organizations would do as you kind of walk into these things? Because sometimes, every time that they don't do something, it's ultimately something either you or your partners have to do, right?
Yeah. So the best thing is for C-level executives and especially CEOs to not just go, I don't know anything about cyber, so I'm going to X, Y, or Z, whatever that is. It is just like anything else. I urge every executive to learn a little bit, even if it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes a week. Over the course of a year, you're going to learn so much more, and you're going to start to understand and communicate better with those that are explaining the threat. And that's what I've seen even in Fortune 500 and 100 companies. Is if you don't have someone that is just a really, really good communicator, and they talk even just a little bit of cyber or security speak, sometimes it blows right past some of the higher organizational levels, and they don't fully understand the risk. And so that's one of the things that if you're starting your company, if you're a COO, a CEO, if you're an executive in a company, I think it is. I think it is something that you have to do nowadays by just understanding the threat, understanding just a little bit more about cyber, understanding the basic nomenclature and terminology, so that when these conversations are had, it doesn't sound like you're talking to the FBI and it's alphabet soup.
All right. Hey, Jason, thanks for spending some time with us.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, guys. I don't know if you're going to be able to find that local security expert that's in that government agency somewhere. And even if you do find them, it may be hard to get them out of that spot. But hey, it's worth a try. Take care. And back to you guys in the studio.
All right. I hope you enjoyed today's show. In the intro, I forgot to mention the something old today was from our Secure Software Summit, and that was Jonathan Schneider, co-founder, CEO of Modern, about open rewrite, making your source code fix itself. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that as well as all of the other great content. We will be back next Monday, where again, as I mentioned, we're live from the Linux Foundation in Austin. I think we go live around 9:30 Central Time there. So we'll see you then. Until then, have a great weekend. We have a best of show tomorrow. Be safe, be strong, be tech strong. We'll see you soon. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of TechstrongTV. Today's episode is chock full of goodness. Got some great interviews, some good old, something old stuff from a previous virtual event, and more. Let me get right down to it. First of all, as I've mentioned, welcome to today's show. I hope everyone's well, and we've been back on the road here at TechstrongTV. We were out at RSA last week, and if you didn't catch any of our streaming interviews live, we will be replaying a lot of the interviews over the coming weeks. And actually, next week we are in Austin at the Linux Foundation Open Source Summit, and we'll be streaming live from there as well. And during the downtimes in between live interviews there, we'll be replaying our RSA interviews as well. So if you tune in next week, you can catch both our RSA stream and the live stream from the Linux Foundation's Open Source Summit. But let's focus in on today. Today's show includes an interview with an old friend of mine, Gabe Monroy. I knew Gabe when he was doing an open source startup and another startup before that. Wound up eventually selling Deus to Mike, which was one of his open source startups, sold it to Microsoft, and he really became a key person in the Azure, Microsoft Azure management team there. Gabe recently left Microsoft, though, to become Chief Product Officer over in DigitalOcean. And he talks to us about, why he did it, why he's really excited about what they're doing over at DigitalOcean, and some exciting things he's developing there based upon what he's learned. It's great. It's great to see. It was great to see Gabe. It's great to see the growth he's gone through here, and I highly recommend it. Next up, I have another interview that I did with Brian Gilmore. Brian's been on before, of course. He's our Director of Product Management at Influx Data, the people behind Influx Tv. And they just released their Edge Data Replication, a new capability for centralized business insights. And Brian thinks this could be a real game changer there. He'll tell us why. Check that one out. After that, really happy to have our monthly feature featuring GitLab. It's the lab featuring developer, evangelist, CNCF, I think board member, Brendan O'Leary, where he's going to tell us about what's new in this month's release at GitLab. After that, we have a good interview with Charlene. Charlene is interviewing Michael Hunger, Senior Director of User Innovation at Neo4j. And he's going to talk about tool sprawl and